This I can say with confidence. One person or company seizing inspiration from another person or company is nothing new, and under certain circumstances, totally legal. So the ultimate question is that I get asked all the time, Justin, why are you so against outright fragrance dupes? Why don't you recommend them? Before I dive into that, I need to dive into some names and some numbers. First, let's talk about what I call copies from well-known brands. I'm just using a few examples here. First example, as you'll see in this comment that was asking a very poignant question, Raja Parfum. It is a well-known fact that many of Raja Parfum's fragrances, I wouldn't say a majority of them, but many of them do resemble other fragrances in the market, other well-known iconic designer or niche fragrances from houses with a lot of heritage and prestige. Now, granted, I do believe that Raja has done his own thing. He's kind of imposed his own aesthetic and touch on these fragrances that, yes, do resemble other scents. And people ask me, what do I think of that? Do I think that's cloning? Do I think that's duping? Do I think that's drawing inspiration? Clearly, these are not necessarily original fragrances. However, as I observe it, that behavior does not define the entirety of the brand. Raja Parfum as a brand is not out here just trying to capitalize on all the most hottest popular fragrances, and definitely not on a regular basis. I feel like it's been quite a while since they released a fragrance that very closely resembled another fragrance, and it was pretty obvious. Mancera. Lots of their fragrances have relation to other fragrances out there, even if they're not outright copies or dupes. We can easily call them inspirations, and there's a lot of them. If you just go through in Fragrantica and you look at this fragrance reminds me of this, you'll see a lot of crossover between other well-known fragrances in the industry with a lot of Mancera offerings. Not all of them, but I would say most of them are related to other things, but they still have their own aesthetic. They still smell within the Mancera umbrella. And our last example in this category is Initio Parfum Privé, whatever they call themselves. They also have a lot of close relations, but no outright dupes. But there are some interesting lines being blurred when compared to Parfum de Marly. Now, Parfum de Marly and Initio, if you didn't know, are owned by the same parent company. That company is called Advent International. So if you go through a number of their popular fragrances, you'll see some crossover. You'll see that certain fragrances from Initio resemble certain fragrances from Parfum de Marly, and I don't think that's an accident. I think they're just kind of remixing and reusing what works on one side and moving it to the other, and they're just kind of exchanging them, all in the effort to continue the cash flow. Again, nothing new here. We all know this. Now, of the three brands I just shared with you, Raja Parfum is the only brand I really have, I'd say, an affinity for, at least historically. I have a lot of their fragrances. Many of them I really respect and love. A lot of their newer stuff, honestly, I don't really care for that much. They've kind of gone in a different direction, but I respect a lot of the perfumery that has come out of that brand. Mancera, I have a few of their offerings. I enjoy them. Again, they all kind of resemble other things to me, but it actually doesn't bother me because they are different enough. And they, again, have a cohesiveness to them as far as the brand goes. Initio, honestly, I've never been a huge fan of Initio. I don't have any of their fragrances. The ones that I've tried don't really measure up to me as far as quality. They always leave me with something to be desired, a certain hollowness to them. I definitely prefer Parfum de Marly over Initio, but even Parfum de Marly's current direction is not necessarily exciting me either, but I have a number of their offerings that I really enjoy and will always have and talk about on this channel. Let's move on to another category. I'm calling it luxury inspiration brands. And these are brands where a majority of their fragrances are really eerily close to other popular fragrances out there. They're kind of modeling them. Now, not every brand does this in the same way. The first one I'll talk about is Algabra. I love Algabra Parfum. I've talked about that brand a lot on this channel, but if you go through their catalog, you will see that, yeah, a lot of their fragrances, if not most of them, resemble some other things. Now, granted, they do what I'd call aesthetic twists. Take a fragrance, for instance, Ancient Fortress. When I first tried this fragrance, I did a first impressions video. I just said, man, this smells like Tuscan leather. And I was honestly unimpressed in that video. After that, I actually gave it a full wearing and realized, you know what? Yes, there is some inspiration, there is some resemblance, but it does do its own thing. It's kind of a unique twist on this idea, and therefore it is kind of something new altogether. And they have a lot of fragrances that do that. And the more I've gotten to know them and really feel the quality of them and enjoy the overall experience, I'm like, you know what? These aren't dupes to me. These aren't just outright lazy copies. A brand is trying to, again, capitalize on what's popular without much effort. That is not what Algabra is doing, at least not as far as I'm concerned. Similar idea with Spirit of Kings. I don't know the brand all that well. I'm not quite as intimately acquainted with them, but the offerings that I've tried from them clearly resemble other fragrances. It's actually very blatant and very obvious. They're not really trying to hide it. But again, I'm saying luxury inspiration brands. The quality is there. They get great perfumers. I know Christian Provenzano does a lot of their fragrances, and they use quality ingredients, and the fragrances come together in a quality way where they don't smell super lazy. They do smell like they have a little bit of twist to them, a little bit of a different lens, maybe some brand cohesiveness, but again, don't know the brand well enough to really say that conclusively. But it's clear a lot of the new releases they give us may not exist or may not have a foot to stand on if it weren't for previous releases that they're basing them from. As I said, I wanted to get into names and numbers. We did some names. Let's do some numbers with more names. These numbers might seem trivial, but you might see where I'm going with them and it'll make sense in a moment. I'm going to list for you 12 designer and niche brands that I like and respect, and I'm going to share the number of fragrances that each of these brands has launched since 2024. The House of Javoy. In 2024, they launched one fragrance. Yes. And in 2025, they've launched nothing yet. Cartier. In 2024, they put out 4 fragrances. In 2025, we've seen no new releases from them as of yet. Houbigant. 4 new releases in 2024. No new releases as of 2025 yet. Hermes, 4 releases just last year. 2 releases so far this year in 2025. Penhaligon's, 2 releases last year, 2024. 3 releases so far this year in 2025. They've been a little busy, but just a little bit. Brioni, they've basically put out 1 new fragrance every year since 2022. They put out 2 in 2021, and that was kind of the revitalization of their branding, of their new collection that they are now marketing, but nothing in 2025 just yet. Amouage, they've gotten a little busier than normal in the past few years, but still nothing crazy. They put out 5 new fragrances last year in 2024, and they've put out 6 so far this year in 2025. Again, this is just as of August, so if you see this in September, October, November, these numbers might be different for these brands. The House of Bulgari, they've been a little bit busy too. As far as a designer house, they put out 6 fragrances last year, and they've put out 8 fragrances this year. Now that is across a few different collections, so that's why it amounts to a few more, but nonetheless, they've kept Alberto Marias busy in that lab, and maybe he's not the only one, but I do know he makes a lot of their fragrances. Kilian, we all love Kilian. They put out 4 fragrances last year. They've only put out 2 this year. I really want to try that new Angel Share on the Rocks. Really looking forward to that. Chanel, they put out 5 new fragrances last year, all in different collections, none of them in their mainstream male marketed realm, being Bleu de Chanel. But this year, they literally just announced Bleu de Chanel L'Exclusif. If I'm saying that right, it's set to launch late August 2025. And I believe when that launches, I think it'll be 3 new fragrances for the brand total this year. The House of Frappan, love this house, very underrated, very under-discussed. Just 2 new fragrances last year in 2024, and no new fragrances this year in 2025. Dior, I've found an interesting trend about Dior. Sometimes they get busy and they release a lot of new fragrances across their different lines, but they never exceed 10 in a year. There have been several years in the past handful of years where they put out just 10. They'd always stop at 10. That must be something that they planned. They put out 10 last year in 2024, and so far in 2025, they put out 10. So that might be it for them for the year. I don't know. Maybe they'll break the trend, but most likely not. And Mancera. Again, we talked about Mancera earlier. They are a house that I do believe does draw inspiration from other brands, and maybe that is kind of the cornerstone for a lot of their new releases, but they're still not going crazy with the numbers. They only put out 5 new fragrances last year in 2024. If you put that next to their sister brand Montal, then maybe the numbers are more, but I'm just focusing on Mancera because I do separate the 2. And so far in 2025, they put out just 3 new fragrances. So not crazy numbers here from a lot of these brands, you know, maybe you love, maybe you have some offerings from. All pretty reasonable stuff. Still maybe more than it used to be in the past, and we'll get to that a little bit later, but it's reasonable. Now let's get into the meat of the argument. Dedicated clone or dupe brands. And these are brands where a majority or all of their fragrances are intended to be copies, dupes, clones. They are trying to be other fragrances out there, sometimes even making bottles that resemble those fragrances, but they're just trying to really capitalize on that market share, and they're doing it instantaneously. A new fragrance drops, within a few months we have a dupe. I think that behavior is pretty telling of motivation. Again, we'll get to all that here in a second. But here are just a few of these brands that you know, and I'm going to share some numbers with you, and these numbers were a little bit staggering to me, and I hope they kind of start to illuminate my point here. Let's start with the House of Lattafa. In 2025, so far up to August, they've released 25 new fragrances. All right, and if we go back to 2024, they put out a total of 50 plus new fragrances just last year. Busy. Rasasi, they've been fairly quiet this year, even though they did just launch a whole bunch of new Hawass fragrances all at one time. And that's always a little suspect to me. I'm like, man, you got all these all at once, like 3, 4, 5 new ones, just bam, just like that. But all in all, they've only released 9 new fragrances this year so far. I'm sure there's more to come before the end of the year. However, last year in 2024, they released 70 plus new fragrances to the market. You do with that what you will. And let's get to the big kahuna. Honestly, my sights weren't really set on this brand for the last several years until I started looking at the numbers, until I went on Fragrantica and I looked at, first of all, since 2015, this brand has released over 1,800 new fragrances to the market. I feel like that's a record. There's brands that have been around a couple hundred years that don't come close to that. So okay, last year in 2024, they put out 60 plus new fragrances. So far in 2025, just up to August, we still got a few months before the end of the year. I was astounded while I was counting. I was scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. Dua Fragrances is who we're talking about. Dua has released over 140 new fragrances in 2025 alone. It's just August. So, wow. I'm not going to get emotional about it. I just want to present the facts. Let's keep going. So let's look at it from a business standpoint really quick. While inundating the market with a bunch of new products, and in this case, cloning every new popular fragrance as soon as it comes out. While that can be seen as good business, which I agree, if you're a business and your number one goal is to maximize profits, then yeah, that's good business as long as it's legal. But nonetheless, I can't respect the blatant motivation. It's pretty clear. Again, we saw the disparity between the numbers. So many people are saying these days that well-known niche and designer brands are kind of ripping us off. The prices are going up. They're getting way too expensive. Thus, these brands are just greedy. They just want our money, even though they don't want to give us a better product. That's what people are saying. I'm not saying that, but there's a lot of that echoing throughout the halls of this crazy little space we occupy. But this is the question I have to ask. How is a brand flooding the market with dozens and dozens and dozens of new products in a year not greedy, even if the prices are low? And we'll get to the problem with that in a second, but how is that not greedy? Maybe that's just a rhetorical question. Maybe you have an answer. Many people will imply that these dupe brands are Robin Hooding the industry. They're undercutting the rich and making luxury accessible to the, well, not rich. Are these actions truly noble? Are they really out here trying to serve the underserved little guy? Or are they just manipulating him with their low prices and endless variety, making it all too easier to spend more money in the long run in pursuit of a better deal? Here's the thing. I know you guys aren't dumb. The biggest problem I see is that many people already know this. They know these things. They can see the behavior and intentions and motivations of these brands. They're out on display. Regardless, people simply just surrender to the manipulation. They're okay with it. Why? Well, as far as I see it, as long as the price is low and maybe the performance is high, their gratification is now instant, and it doesn't really matter to them whether a company is concerned with offering them a great quality product and adding value to them, or just distracting them for their dollars. Now, we obviously haven't even mentioned the elephant in the room issue, which is artistic integrity, but I'm actually not going to go into that in this video because I've talked about that at great lengths in past videos. And honestly, it's become a bit of a moot point. Conclusion. So what is my answer to this question? Why am I so against outright dupes, especially the brands that focus on them? Why don't I recommend them? Well, the reason for me has morphed over time. If you asked me a few years ago, it was purely about the infringement and abandonment of original art in perfumery. And while that is still a concern to me, and a deep one, I realized it was kind of a selfish one. It just had to do with me and my preferences. I also realized it was futile to get people to care about that as much as I do. So today, the biggest reason why I don't stand behind this type of perfumery is bigger than me. It's a broader scope. I don't believe it actually serves the industry. I don't believe it actually serves you in the long run. It is absolutely inconceivable how much the market has ballooned just since I've been around, and that's been just about the last 10 years. I heard Demi Rawling mention this in a great video she did recently. She was talking about how around the time we got involved in making content here, which is again the last 10 years or so, the fragrance industry, the market was quite different. New releases were so impactful because they were so infrequent. They had so much anticipation and excitement, and they typically lived up to the hype because brands were taking their time. They weren't rushing these releases. Now, I didn't have the time to do the research on this before I made this video, so I can't say this conclusively, but I believe that the burgeoning clone market over the last few years has had a direct effect on the traditional perfume market, and that we now see many brands releasing more fragrances per year than they ever did. And I think that's in order to keep up with the changing demands and expectations of consumers like you. We've been conditioned to expect more often, more strength, more quality, but for less money. Let me know what you think.